Now I'm happy to introduce Emily Shearer. So, Emily Shearer, she's our Food Acquisition Program Manager for the Food Bank of Iowa. Emily graduated from Iowa State University with a bachelor's degree in fashion merchandising, and she's still a buyer. Although now she's just purchasing food for Food Bank of Iowa's 55 county service area instead of clothing. Emily discovered her passion for helping those struggling with food insecurity while volunteering at her local food pantry. Emily has been the food sourcing acquisition manager at Food Bank of Iowa for 5 years now. In the truly bonkers year that was 2020, she welcomed a son, Mason, and in her free time, she likes baking, reading, and running outside. Welcome, Emily.
Hi guys, welcome. I know this is a little bit of a change of schedule, so I appreciate you guys rolling with the punches. Like Ty said, my name is Emily Shearer. I'm the Food Acquisition Manager. I have actually been with the Food Bank for about 6.5 years, so I did not vet my own bio. So I have been here longer than what it said. In my time here, food sourcing has evolved and gone through a lot of change. Those who have been here, kind of like what Leslie said, those who have been here for a long time, you have seen a lot of those changes. And so we'll kind of talk through some of those. And my clicker. Okay, so during the presentation, I'll talk about how we source food, our 3 main food streams, why I buy the food I buy, the complex world of best by, sell by, use by dates, and why we don't have turkeys at Thanksgiving. I know that's a pretty controversial talking point, so I will cover that in a few minutes. I welcome any and all questions, but like Ty said, we'll save them for the end. So please do, I welcome questions. And then just a little shout out for the survey. It is pretty selfish on my part because that's how I find out what you want. So please do be as specific as possible. Next slide. So when I talk about our inventory, I talk about it like a pie. And this is based on calendar year 22. And so we distributed a little over 19 million pounds during that calendar year 22. And as a point of comparison, when I first started about 6.5 years ago, we were distributing a little over 12 million pounds of food. So whatever that math is, 7 million pounds, that percentage. So it has been a significant increase in a fairly short amount of time. There are a lot of reasons for those increases. You're all seeing them at your agencies every day. But increased awareness about food banking, I will say that was one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is just that people realized what food banking is, what food pantries are, and what we all do, and just how close we all are to that food insecurity. So the increased awareness, specialty funding, kind of like what Leslie said, with federal programs like trade mitigation and the CARES Act, and then most importantly, just that incredible need from the neighbors. As you can see, our 3 sourcing streams are purchasing, TFAP, and I call it USDA, I use those interchangeably, and then food donations. So each of those categories are very different. I'll kind of break down one by one. They each have their own guidelines, their own best practices. And so we can break those down. So purchasing, starting with that, we do purchase to ensure that we almost always have a consistent supply of certain foods on inventory. So they are foods that maybe aren't available through donation, maybe something we just can't keep in stock, even if it is donate or purchase, we just have to keep buying it, or maybe cost prohibitive for our agencies to procure themselves. So we always try to carry canned, shelf-stable fruit and vegetable, a protein, like tuna or chicken, pasta sauce, and then some kind of grain like pasta or rice. Purchasing has probably been the thing that has changed the most. I was having a discussion with ladies at my table this morning in our Feeding America network I read recently. On average, purchasing is up 58%. So that is an incredible amount. When you think about your own purchasing that you're doing at the grocery store and think about how much those things cost, we're paying $8 a pound for ground beef at our households. I'm not paying quite that much, but definitely the food is more. I say we're buying more for more. So the pandemic did prove to be incredibly challenging. I think I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. There were a lot of supply chain disruptions, and some vendors are still making their way back. Some of the donors that I work with, they've had incredible staffing issues. They just reduced the number of SKUs that they were producing because they can't keep up. They're still having supply chain issues. So they're just making their way back to being fully operational. I wasn't always able to keep everything in stock on a consistent basis, and we're still technically waiting for some loads that I ordered during the pandemic. I feel like at this point it's probably safe to say they're not coming, but I'm crossing my fingers for this load of tuna that I've had on order since 2021. Something that was really eye-opening to me during that time was the availability of certain items and just how interesting food production is. I think a green bean is a green bean is a green bean. The label just changes. And so what I saw was that a lot of the vendors that we work with also, they produce for maybe food banks and food pantries, but they also produce for retailers like Costco, and you're going to get more money from Costco. So a lot of the foods weren't available during that time because vendors were pivoting to fulfill those grocery retail orders. So orders like they would be canceled without notice. I wasn't always able to find some of those common items, things like peanut butter, which you would never think there would be a shortage of peanut butter, but that was a challenge. So those are kind of some of the unique things that we saw. I think you probably all saw them as well. So from calendar year 21 to calendar year 22, there was a 19% increase in purchasing, which is pretty huge. In calendar year calendar year 21, we were purchasing about 6% of our inventory, and now flash forward, it's 25 to 30%. So that's a huge increase, especially when you consider what the prices are. You've likely seen the same thing when you're doing your own shopping. As a personal aside, I'm never more aware of my food security than when I am shopping with my 2.5-year-old. He doesn't want one of the 4 snacks I have packed in the diaper bag, and to avoid a tantrum, I can just pick something off the shelf without having to think about it. I think about it every single time I'm in the grocery store. So any of you who have ever navigated that landmine can probably relate. So canned fruit is a great example. That's one of the things that I think has changed the most in my time here. Canned fruit is always more expensive than, say, a canned vegetable because the majority of canned fruit, I think all of it is produced internationally, if not the majority of it. So when you think back to 2018 when trade mitigation started and the Trump administration introduced those tariffs, that caused a huge increase. So I would say, I think when I first started, canned peaches maybe cost around 70 cents a unit. And then when trade mitigation started, it maybe jumped 25 to 30%. And then with the pandemic and inflation, it was well over $1 a unit, sometimes double. So when you maybe see that we don't have the variety that we used to, it's because I'm literally buying half the amount for the same amount of money, if that math translates. So whenever I'm purchasing food, when I'm using our budget dollars, our donor dollars, I always aim to make the healthiest choice possible. So that means canned fruits packed in juice or water, low sodium vegetables, low sugar or no sugar added pasta sauce. Purchased food is what I have the most control over, and so I really do try to make the best choices possible. I can't guarantee I can bring in everything all the time, but that's why things like that survey are so critical, because I want to hear from you. Even if it seems like I've asked her repeatedly, I've shared repeatedly, I want this, I hear you. I just am trying to do the most that I can with what I have in that time. So there are certain items that I rarely, if ever, bring in for any number of reasons. Snacks is usually my go-to example. I fully recognize that's one of our most requested items. It's also one of the most cost prohibitive when you consider what it is, how big it is, and how far they go, or how not far they go, just because they're so popular. But they're one of the things that I always look for with donations. So fruit snacks are a great example. Fruit snacks, I would never pay for fruit snacks. They're maybe not the most nutritionally sound item, but also the same people that donate my Cheerios and Honey Nut Cheerios also produce fruit snacks, so I will happily take those fruit snacks if it means I get a truckload of cereal with it. So every year I get a lot of questions about turkeys. I recognize turkeys are something that you hear a lot. I get it. It's a traditional holiday food. You want them. Your neighbors are asking for them. However, I opt to use my purchasing dollars to bring in pallets of traditional side dishes like stuffing and instant potatoes. So I could purchase turkeys, some food banks do, and I know once upon a time, before my time, so 7+ years ago, we did buy turkeys, but when you consider what they would cost, how many people we're serving, I could opt to buy turkeys for one day, or I could buy, I call them groceries, but our inventory for probably 2 to 3 months. And so that decision feels better to me. I'm more confident in making that decision that we can serve our neighbors better and more fully for 2 to 3 months. And so we do encourage you to work with your communities. One of the great things is that we hear about how well supported a lot of you are, how involved your community members are. So you could say, I can get my instant potatoes, I can get my green beans or my stuffing from the food bank, but what we really need is turkeys. So I know that that's maybe not the most popular answer, but I do want to explain my thinking. I'm not just like, no turkeys for anybody. It's a financial decision. I also don't demonize any food. So with fruit snacks is a great example. When I'm using donor dollars, I purchase the healthiest food I possibly can. But if somebody wants to donate fruit snacks, cookies, ice cream, that's fine. I'm obviously not going to accept a load of ice cream over a load of chicken drumsticks or green beans. But if we have the space, it feels good to me to be able to offer that treat. And also, as you're working with your RPCs, you know that we're really focused on school pantries. I know that we have a lot of school pantry partners here today, and it's helpful to think about a student being able to remove that barrier and say, I'm just going to go to Mrs. Jones' office and just get a snack, just get some fruit snacks, and while they're there, they can access that food pantry and just remove that barrier or that stigma that they might be feeling. So again, I don't buy that food, but I welcome those donations. So right now we do charge a small shared maintenance fee, like Tammy mentioned. I think the highest price you'd pay is maybe 19 cents a pound for some food, but I think on average it's somewhere around 4 to 6 cents a pound. Some of our food is free, and that's to help people make healthy decisions. Like produce, I think is no shared maintenance. That's to help people have access to fresh produce, but also to help us distribute it too. So it is mutually beneficial. And as Tanya mentioned earlier, the Purchase Plus program. So like Michelle said, like Tammy said, during that listening tour, we heard you. Personal care is really important. Occasionally I'll have grant funding. Earlier this year, one of the things I'm most thrilled about, most proud of, is that I did buy them, but they were wrapped but loose tampons. That's an incredibly cost prohibitive item. Period poverty is what they call it. And so whenever I'm able to procure those items, I do. But to start, we are going to pilot Purchase Plus with toilet paper and laundry detergent. And to fully beat the dead horse, please fill out your survey. And for those of you that are buying those items, I'm genuinely curious what you're currently paying, because I've never bought them. I've never sourced them. So I know what I personally pay at the store. I have no idea what kind of connections you have. So I would love to hear, hey, I can get a roll of toilet paper for 28 cents. And then I can say, oh my gosh, she has a really good deal. Or, okay, that's a good jumping off point. I see I can source toilet paper for insert whatever price. So I'm genuinely curious about that talking point. So starting with toilet paper and laundry detergent, we also hear you. It doesn't feel good to give single ply toilet paper. So I will be looking for a good toilet paper, a good laundry detergent. So you'll hear, just keep your eyes peeled, your ears open for updates from your RPC. So going over to TFAP, USDA. So Leslie did a really great job covering that. This is by far the most complicated part of my job. I could talk about it all day. I don't want to, but I could. TFAP is a budget administered by DHHS, and it allows me to procure pantry staples, your vegetable oil, peanut butter, pasta sauce, rice, really just those staple items. Each state is different, so the program looks different at each of the food banks. So that was a really eye-opening thing. I know how Iowa operates, and that's it. So part of TFAP is also a bonus, like Leslie mentioned, other specialty programs like trade mitigation, CARES funding, Build Back Better, and our current program, Commodity Credit Corporation. So these specialty programs are how we have a lot of our milk, our dried fruits and nuts, dried beans, and fresh produce. Last year, some of you may have seen diapers on inventory. That was really specialty limited funding, that was federal funding, that we were able to use for diapers. So I do say these programs are really great. In that same breath, they are not set up in a sustainable way, which is, it's difficult. And I made the joke before, for those of you that have been here a while, trade mitigation was really the first influx that we saw in TFAP. When I first started, TFAP made up maybe 20% of our inventory. At the highest point, which was probably CARES Act funding, it was 50 to 60% of our inventory. And now, like Leslie said, it's back to pre-pandemic levels, so 20%. And I made the joke that people were gonna be like, why'd you fire that girl that got all that food? I'm not fired, but the food just isn't there. They're not set up in a sustainable way. Like right now, we've seen up to a 25% decrease, if not more. So that makes purchasing to fill those gaps incredibly costly. Where did I had a joke in here, but I'll just skip it. Okay, so it was about food dating. I'll get to it. Okay, so more than ever, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, it's become just that. It is emergency food. Recently, I was in Washington, D.C. with my coworker, Neil, and we went with legislators to talk about the importance of SNAP. I think we all know SNAP is the most effective way to end food insecurity because that is a lot of times on the chopping block. We also talked about the importance of bolstering TFAP. It's not only a great way to help food banks fill these gaps, it also is beneficial to the farmers. So on to donated. So donation is the most impactful part of what we do. About 50% of the food we receive and distribute is donated. I personally work with wholesalers, manufacturers, producers to secure large-scale donations of pallets and truckloads of product. My coworker Sonia, who many of you know, works with retailers in our food rescue program. They'll be talking about that piece a little bit later today. Almost all the donations I work with come into our distribution center and are received onto our inventory to try our best to ensure equitable access. I know that's really hard when you have 700 partners, 55 counties, and maybe you get 5 pallets of eggs. They are a donation, that's incredible. 5 pallets is whatever the math is, again, divided by 700, that's not gonna go super far, but we really do try to make it as equitable as possible. So some of the examples of the great donors that we work with in our area are Barilla, General Mills, the Fairway Distribution Center, Hormel, and Armour Eckridge. In our service area, we are really fortunate to have a lot of donors. They understand a lot of what we do and donate whenever they're able. I also know that you personally, like Tyson and Storm Lake, Tyson and Perry, know that they're really generous in their individual communities. But if you ever have something, I know we've gotten some panic calls from agencies that are like, they want to donate 8 pallets of something to me. I can take a pallet. Please let us know. You don't have to turn that food down, but I recognize it's kind of a figure it out situation. So please know we're always a resource. We love to collaborate and figure those things out. So food can be available for donation for a number of reasons. It's excess food, it's discontinued, it's close dated, mislabeled, misshipped, damaged, or just because. I often receive offers for damaged and close dated product. I know that sounds unappealing, but damaged usually means the box is dented. How many of you have gotten Honey Nut Cheerios that look like they were dropped out of a car, but maybe run over by said car, but the interior packaging is just fine. So that's usually what happens with a damaged donation. And close dated means that the best by date is soon, but there's still an extension date, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. So for those organizations, a lot of my job involves donor education. So how many of you are familiar with either the Good Samaritan Act or the Emerson Act? Okay, so that's language that says it was implemented, I believe, in 1996 by the Clinton administration to help combat food waste. Something like 40% of the food in this country is wasted. I'm just as guilty of it as anybody else. I always use the example of salad mixes, and then they go into the vegetable crisper for some reason, and then I find I have like spinach soup a couple weeks later. So super guilty of it. But what that act says, it's legal language that says if you're a donor who is donating something in good faith and for someone for some reason becomes ill because of it, they are not held liable. So removing that liability helps a lot of donors. I get it. You don't want your name attached to something that makes somebody ill, but I don't think there's ever been an instance of somebody pressing legal action or anything like that. So having that conversation with donors is really helpful. We do also have a clean room for those of you that have been to our facility. That means it's clean and sanitized before and after every shift. We can, when I say bulk, think of a watermelon bin like what you see at the grocery store, but it's full of Cheez-Its or Cheerios or potatoes or rice or beans or pasta. That's a huge area of opportunity. So our clean room allows us to repack that product in a clean space. We have a label maker, we can label it. So if you've ever gotten a plain zip top bag with a label, it looks pretty institutional. That's the same retail food, it just came in a different format and we were able to get it for free, and free is good, yes? We can also add, sometimes relabeling. Right now I'm in a conversation with Barilla because they have some pasta that says it was produced in Australia. It must have been a printing error. We can say made in the USA, produced in the USA, but having that conversation, letting them know that they're not liable, anything like that. So that's a lot of my job. I kind of already talked about bulk opportunities. During the pandemic, when food service operations and restaurants were in limbo, that was a big area of opportunity. It was maybe 50-pound bags of potatoes or 700-pound totes of crackers. So we utilize volunteers to pack into consumer sizes. So it's maybe not as visually appealing as what you get at the grocery store, but it's still the exact same food. Occasionally I hear from truck drivers who have had product on their trucks rejected for one reason or another. That's kind of what I mentioned earlier. Maybe you hear from truck drivers in your area. I have been burned a number of times. That recently happened, like last week. So just asking as many questions as possible, but that is an opportunity, especially with the pandemic and staffing issues. I've heard that there's a lot of misships, there's a lot of errors. There was gallon jugs of mayonnaise. For any of you that saw it, it was Jimmy John's mayonnaise, and we got a call that they didn't have room on their dock. And whether or not that was true, maybe it was a misship, maybe they didn't order it, maybe they did order it and they're like, I don't want it, but then we got it. So that's, my job is really weird, but those are some of the opportunities that we have. So on to food dating. Like Leslie said, USDA food is the exception here. You do have to distribute it by that date. However, we use the Food Keeper's Guide, and that guide was put together by members of the Department of Science at Cornell. It was put together by the Food Marketing Institute and the USDA. And what that's saying, almost all foods, save for baby food and baby formula, is food safe to eat well beyond its expiration date. There's some more hard and fast things like milk. You know, you can't have milk 6 months beyond its date, but it's food safe for 7 days beyond its date. So food dating is tied to food quality, not food safety. I ate a year-old box of macaroni and cheese not that long ago, and I am still here, so it is fine. I do want to emphasize that we don't ever want you to distribute anything that you're uncomfortable distributing, but just know that we never intentionally send you bad food. Sure, there's a moldy potato that makes its way in there. Sometimes oranges turn. But a lot of times there is an extension date. So pasta, for example, is good maybe 2 to 5 years after that best by date. So I do reference a guide. So just know that when I'm receiving an opportunity, I look and I say, okay, this is maybe the listed date, but this is when it's food safe to actually eat. And you can always ask your RPC. You can always call me. You can always call our distribution center to ask those questions. And so, operating on that guide, food dating is a larger issue than food banking. It's just a consumer issue. So operating on that guide just helps reduce food waste, keeps food out of the landfills, and just educates people, myself included. I always learn something. So 2023 goals, where are we headed? I think we all know, unfortunately, the need is not decreasing, it is only increasing, and I don't foresee that going down anytime soon. With record inflation, people are still recovering from the pandemic, with a lack of movement toward a mandated living wage, I'll just have to continue to source more food than ever, hoping we see monetary donations, continued federal support for the TFAP program, and continuous donor engagement. I am grateful we have fantastic community partners, supportive donors, and then, of course, all our incredible pantry network to help. Oh, God. Okay. When I think about how to best use the resources I have, I think about the most cost-prohibitive items to source at the store. So I've gotten some comments that, hey, you used to have 3 canned fruits and now you only have 1, now you only have 2. The way I'm looking at it, and again, this is where I need your feedback, I'm thinking of what is the most expensive thing for somebody who is on SNAP, who is on a limited income to source at the grocery store, or to purchase at the grocery store. I am making a concerted effort to put more funding dollars, more purchasing dollars to the purchase of things like meat, milk, eggs, cheese, produce. I heard a term recently, and I think it's very true, there's fresh food insecurity. And so that's really what I'm trying to focus on. So one of my goals for the coming year is to source more of those fresh foods. I'm hoping to bring in those foods more consistently. Then that would allow you to maybe utilize your donor dollars, leverage your community support to purchase that extra canned fruit or that canned vegetable, some of those more cost-effective items at the store. For example, I know I've heard some comments, we're calling it chicken fatigue at the food bank. I know that we have consistently had chicken drumsticks. I know that ground beef is the most popular. As a point of comparison, I can get a truckload of chicken drumsticks for 35 cents a pound. So at 40,000 pounds, I think I did the math, it was between $14,000 and $16,000 for a truckload. That Ben and I, my coworker who helps me, were just giddy about a truckload of protein for $15,000. Ground beef, the lowest price I've seen is $1.71 a pound. I understand ground beef is very popular. It's really well recognized by neighbors, but at $1.71 a pound, that's almost $70,000 for a truckload. So I can get 5 truckloads of chicken or 1 truckload of ground beef. And I know that you want ground beef. I'll do my best to find it, and maybe we'll consistently have drumsticks, but then we'll try our best to get ground beef. But just as a point of comparison, those are the decisions that I do make. It's better to get more food. So like Michelle said, like Tammy said, we are finishing up work on an expansion of our distribution center. We'll have more frozen and dry space. The dry space will allow me to accept more donations. These aren't things that I will purchase, but maybe I'll look for opportunities. There's maybe an opportunity for mustard. That's maybe an exciting thing that could transform a meal, or seasonings or stuff that maybe I wouldn't spend money on, but I've not had the storage capacity to bring in via donation. So looking for more of those opportunities. I'm also committed to purchasing local wherever possible. So whether that be purchasing from a local producer, like we have skim milk right now, I'm getting LFPA funds for that. So we have some skim milk from Picket Fence Creamery or Radiance Dairy down in Fairfield, Iowa. We're supporting just an Iowa business like Capital City Fruit or Fairway. For this first quarter, about 23% of my purchases have been with Iowa businesses, and that feels good, not only to support our communities, but also I hear feedback that sometimes those businesses, their employees do seek resources from our food pantries. So it's important to support our communities. And then something I'm trying really hard on, I don't do a great job at it, but I'm trying, is sourcing more culturally relevant foods. There are basic items I know I can always bring in, like dried beans and rice. Fresh produce and a cooking agent like vegetable oil is the easiest thing for us to procure. But I'm always interested in learning more. So unfortunately, we'll never be anybody's 100% solution. That is a really hard pill to swallow for me personally, and I think everybody feels that way at the food bank as well. But just doing the most that I can with what I have, where I'm at. But then the more information I have, I can make the most informed decisions. So I feel like I kind of rushed through that. Does anybody have any questions? And I welcome questions. I can repeat the question if you ask. Betsy and Neil are walking around with microphones. Yeah, right here.
You said something about purchasing milk with LFPA funds.
Yes.
What are LFPA
Yeah, good question. So this gentleman asked, we're purchasing milk with LFPA funds. So LFPA is Local Foods Purchasing Assistance. So that is a program, is federal funding, and all states are getting it. Iowa's doing a really good job of it, and the intention is to boost the local economy, to create more awareness surrounding local foods. There are some guidelines. I do have to pay a fair market price. So what that means with the milk specifically, the fair market price I was offered was $4 a gallon. That's maybe more than I would pay if I was putting on my food bank hat and saying, I need the most milk possible. So it's to raise awareness about local foods. It's to help bolster relationships with producers in hopes that we do continue to purchase more locally. So what I'm doing with those funds, we received $120,000 for this. We're calling it Phase 2, which started in March and goes through, I believe, December. I'm looking at trying to purchase more protein, butter, cheese, and milk. But because it is a fair market price, that doesn't go as far as my food bank dollars were. Does that answer your question? Okay, yeah. What other questions do you have? Yeah.
We have a big demand for tortillas and you can buy it locally.
Yes, yeah.
Have you ever considered getting them?
I have, and I did. Great question. She said they have a demand. Yes, they have a demand for tortillas, and she asked if they were purchased locally. So I have made 2 purchases. It's 5 pallets each, so I'm sure you could take 5 pallets yourself. Because they are produced locally, I am paying a higher price, but I am working, it's called, I'm going to butcher it, Tortilleria Sonora. Her name is Betty, and she's an angel. She is in Des Moines. They are produced locally, and so once a month. The intention is to grow that more. That's maybe an area of opportunity for grant funding, since that is a culturally responsive food. But right now we're starting with 5 pallets, and those 5 pallets cost between $10,000 and $11,000 or $10,000 and $12,000. So it's better than retail pricing. It's not what I would call food bank pricing, but that is one of the things we're looking at. That's a great question.
Well, we have to buy it locally.
Mm-hmm.
We pay a good price for it.
Oh, yeah, well, then I'd be very curious what your pricing is. Yeah. Yeah. What other questions? Yeah.
I do have one question. We do have quite a few homeless. The people that come into our food pantry, they walk, seems like miles.
Yeah.
But, on a hot day, the need for shelf-stable, like shelf-stable milk, yogurt, that kind of thing, that will sustain whatever environment it has to go to. I was wondering, we don't see it very often. We grab it when we can, but I was just wondering how that is.
Yeah. Shelf-stable yogurt we've had once, and it was through a random donation. I didn't even know shelf-stable yogurt existed, but that's something that those types of items are maybe a little more cost prohibitive. But shelf-stable milk, I do try to order through the USDA on a regular basis. It feels like for every agency that's saying I need shelf-stable because they serve a largely homeless population, there's somebody else that's saying we need more fresh food. So really what I'm trying to do is balance the budget. Is it 50% fresh food? Is it 50% shelf-stable? So that's the type of feedback I do welcome. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Can openers.
Yes, can openers.
We go through can openers and we maybe have 20, 30, and we have refugees and people that can't afford one.
Yeah.
And otherwise, we have to go with the pop top for homeless. But do you ever have options to buy those?
So I have bought those a couple times. That's not something I'm able to get. I just call it food bank pricing. I have purchased a couple maybe pallets of can openers through Dollar Tree, so they're just $1.25, but that's maybe something, if you would be interested, that might be a non-food item we can look at through Purchase Plus. And with the Dollar Tree, it's essentially the same pricing as what you're getting, but if you don't have access to a Dollar Tree, or it would be easier to get it delivered, I can certainly add that to the list. That's a great call out. What other questions? I like them. Keep them coming. Yeah.
I don't know if it was last summer or the summer before, but you had some meal kits that came in like clear gallon bags. I think it was like a can of tuna and the noodles and something like that. And then there were the instructions on how to do that. I run a school food pantry.
Okay.
So that was a fabulous idea.
Okay.
Any of those recipe type things that a kid could cook in the summer with no
Yeah.
adults around.
Yeah.
I don't know how cost effective that is, but
Yeah.
honestly, that was a really good product for families and students.
Absolutely. I think those came out of some creativity. This was prior to Leslie joining DHHS, but when we have had an influx of items, I know we did something similar with some dried beans. We had just a mountain range of dried beans, and we were getting dried bean fatigue, understandably, with our agencies, and so we were looking to move them. So we got permission to create a recipe with using those USDA foods, which usually I don't think is super allowed. So I think the tuna meal kit maybe came out of that. That's something we can certainly keep in mind. They are, I don't want to say cost prohibitive because the individual items are still cost effective, but we do that kind of as we need to get this out, so we'll just buy them. We don't necessarily get a deal on them or anything like that, but I can definitely keep that in mind. And it's a great volunteer project, so thank you for sharing that.
Emily.
Yes.
Have you ever purchased large amounts from Meals from the Heartland?
I've not purchased them. So Meals from the Heartland is a really interesting, Meals from the Heartland and outreach. I have gotten calls from organizations that are doing one of those meal packs and they want to donate it to one of our partners. I was fortunate. I used to volunteer at a food pantry and I worked at a food pantry, so I'm really grateful that I've had that perspective. When I was at my food pantry, and I've seen this at others, there are just cupboards full of meals from the Heartland meals. A lot of the feedback I get is that they're not the most popular meal. There's some fatigue with agencies, so I don't ever actively source them, and I don't think I would ever pay for them just because for what they are a little more expensive. But if there is interest, I know I've made requests before.
I know, probably 3 years ago maybe, we got a quinoa meal similar to what that other person was talking about, like individually. They were smaller bags, and they had quinoa and some dried vegetables like beans, peas, and carrots, I think. And a child could put that together. Now, I don't know how they tasted because I don't know if the seasoning was in there or if it was just plain. I have no idea.
Yeah.
And we didn't get a lot of them when we got them. And I think you're right. I think they were donated because one of our past volunteers actually is on the board of Meals for the Heartland. So I think that's how we got them. But
Yeah.
I don't recall. But I know they do kits like for a taco rice thing, and the seasoning was in it. And oatmeal. Their oatmeal was out of this world. So
Okay. I know that when I do have the option, they'll usually ask what flavor I want, and I say the oatmeal is popular, and then the taco mac I know is pretty popular too. Yeah. Yeah. What's your question?
She was talking about the recipes. I know we coordinate with the Mason City food pantry, and sometimes she gets a lot of donations. And one time we got a whole bunch of eggplant.
Oh, okay.
Probably not the most popular thing, but a couple of our volunteers did some searching online and came up with just recipes on our own. And we just printed them up and put them with the eggplant, and they went, oh, well, that's easy. I could do that.
Yes.
And then we also have another volunteer who, when we get those weird kinds of things like the Indian coconut squash or whatever that was, he actually took it home and tried it.
Yeah.
And then he writes some little surveys about it,
Yeah.
and posts it on like the shelf where we have it. And then people are like, oh, well, if he thought it was good.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's so creative.
So just a thought.
Yes. No, I will give a shout out to Iowa State Extension. They do incredible work, and whenever we need recipes, I think that's almost always who we reference. They seem to have a really comprehensive list of, especially with a more unique or maybe not as common item like eggplant or something like that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, will you be able to renew the grant or reapply for the grant for the diapers and the baby wipes?
No, it's my understanding, of course, that was just, I don't know if it was leftover ARPA funds or it was some pot of money that was leftover pandemic funding. So yes, that was tricky. So there's no plan to have those available. I know that was a cool thing to see. Oh my gosh, and a hard thing to have go away. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Will school pantries be able to purchase like the non-food items that you guys?
That's a good question. The question was, will school pantries be able to purchase non-food, the Purchase Plus items? Is that maybe TBD? Or Tammy's over there, she could answer that better.
That is probably to be determined. Because as I mentioned earlier with our donor dollars, it's we will spend the money going out the door on the product, but the money will come right back in on the product if it goes out through the Purchase Plus model. Because we fundraise 100% for our childhood initiatives, we would have to look into that, and that is something that we're considering right now. And to circle back just a second ago, the diapers and wipes it was a program called PEEF, which is the Pandemic Emergency Assistance Fund. And anything that starts with pandemic is no longer funding available to us. And it is so, it's really disappointing because we saw what a wonderful success that was, because they are very cost prohibitive. Diapers particularly are hard to come by when you're working with a limited budget. And so we will look for grants, but we won't ever have them in the volume that we had with that great funding, unfortunately.
Other questions?
Michelle mentioned that you had a big Gorilla contract or something coming up. Is that going to be on the order soon? Like, we're looking for spaghetti. Like, we have nothing,
so
no pasta.
Barilla is a really unique one. There's been a lot of turnover in my time there. They specifically, it's my understanding they're still having staffing issues, so they're maybe not running at full capacity. They've reduced the number of SKUs they're producing. So I was offered a big donation from them. I am waiting for pickup numbers. The spaghetti, if it all comes through, maybe there's a couple pallets that were offered. It's kind of this is what we have, are you interested? And I always am interested. It's maybe not necessarily the noodle shape that you're looking for, but fettuccine was that legal issue that I'm trying to work through right now. So I send a lot of emails. I shamelessly email them and call them a lot. So I am working on that, but I would hope in the month of June, but I'm just still waiting on the donor. I know that's not the answer that you were hoping for. Any other questions? Okay, well, I've spilled my water. I've knocked into the microphone like 20 times, so I'm just gonna say I do wanna end on a huge thank you. Echoing what Michelle said earlier, we truly couldn't do what we do without you. Time is a gift. It's one of the most precious things. And so I am really appreciative, really grateful that you are taking some minutes to spend with me. I welcome other questions if you want to find me after, even if they're not positive questions. I do. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to try to help you do your job better. So thank you for being here. Thank you for what you do. And I'm gonna step away. Thank you.